Thank you so much for joining us online here at Fam Church for our series, Jesus Greater Than. Now, if you haven't already, please click the subscribe button below and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And go out to myfamchurch.com. There you will find all the information about us here at Fam Church. And if you have any prayer requests, please go to the contact section of our website and send us an email and we will pray for you. And now, our lead pastor, Brian Lane.
In this series either. And so let's look at the journey we've been on. And if you've missed any of these messages or after hearing this today, you want to hear more of the series, you can go out to myfamchurch.com, click on the media tab, and then there's a graphic there for Jesus Greater Than. You can click on that and hear the rest of the messages. But in the first week, we looked at Jesus greater than religion. And what we saw in that message was that some people think Jesus is religion, but what we found is that Jesus is greater than religion in this. What religion tells us is that there are things that we need to do to get right with God, that there are ways that we need to behave, and what God is doing is He is sitting up in heaven, and every time we behave the right way, He's got a pile of good stuff, and He puts stuff in the good stuff. And every time we do something wrong, He's got this pile over here, the bad stuff, and He piles stuff up in the bad stuff. And then when we stand before Him at the end of time, He's got this scale and He's going to go, okay, let's scoop all of this good stuff on this side, let's scoop all of this bad stuff up on this side and see where the scales tip out. And if the good side outweighs the bad, then we're good, we're in heaven. But that's not how it works. You see, Jesus said we cannot look at life that way because we're never going to be good enough for God. And so what God did was He sent Jesus to die so that we could be good enough. Because all of those things that we do on the outside, all of those actions, all of those behaviors, they really come from inside of us. It's not our body just kind of doing its own thing. It's like our heart and our mind are telling us to do these things. And so we do those things. And what Jesus did was He came and He died and He rose again so that He could come into the inside of us, clean the inside out so that we could be free on the inside, and then our outside would conform to what's gone on the inside. And that's why Jesus came and died. That's why Jesus is greater than religion, because religion can't save us, but Jesus can. Then the second week, we looked at Jesus greater than sin. And what we saw in that was that, a lot of people who've given their lives to Jesus, they have this struggle in life. It's a constant battle in life with sin. We're constantly battling. We're constantly fighting. And so Jesus has told us we're free from sin, but a lot of times our actions, our activities, how we behave, it just kind of looks like we're not free from sin because we can't get away from doing things that we know we're not supposed to do. And so what we saw in that message was that Jesus was telling us, look, you are free from sin. And so there's a couple of things that we all need to do who are following Jesus, who are walking with Him to get that freedom in our lives. And the first one was this: we needed to speak over our lives on a regular basis that we are free regardless of what our circumstances are telling us. Okay, so regardless of what our circumstance and situation is, if we've given our lives to Jesus, we can say, I am free from sin. We can speak that over our lives over and over and over again. But we also saw that when we do sin, we need to go to Him and confess that we've sinned. And so if we do something 100 times in a day, we need to go back to Him 100 times in that day and confess that sin to Him. And as we confess, He continues to set us free, and we can live in that freedom. And then we saw that there were some sins that we can't just go and confess to God, but we got to go to somebody and get help. Ask somebody to help us to walk through certain sins in order to be free from them. We can't be embarrassed. We can't be afraid because of our sin, because our freedom is worth more than anything. And then last week we looked at Jesus greater than the cross, and what we saw in that message was that Jesus came and He died on that cross, but He was greater than that cross. He was starting a movement. He was starting a movement from death over to life, that He was going to come and bring the Holy Spirit for us to help us, lead us, and guide us through life. And so that's where we've been. And so moving on this morning, I'm going to introduce what we're talking about by asking you guys to think. Now, I know that some of you probably came here hoping to get a nap in, but I want you to turn on your brains for a few minutes, okay? Just switch on your brains, kind of follow me and think with me. I know that most people, if you've grown up in the United States, know something about Jesus. You know something about His life. You know something about how He does things, how He rolled, how He lived His life. And so we're going to look at some of the miraculous things that happened in Jesus' life for a brief time. And if you're sitting there going, oh, I don't want to hear this, I don't believe in any of that, that's fine. You don't have to believe in any of it. I just want to go through this to make a point. And so let's state some things here. All right, the first thing I want to talk about is Jesus, when he fed the 5,000 people. Most people have heard this story where Jesus got 5 loaves, 2 fishes. He was out in the countryside, had all these people to feed, 5,000, and he just fed them all with the 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And you know, the Bible says there was 5,000 people, but back then, the only people that were men, and so the conclusion is there was 5,000 men there, but with the women and the children, there was probably more like 15,000 people. And so here's Jesus, 15,000 people, 5 loaves, 2 fishes. Okay? Other miraculous stories. Walking on water, right? We all have heard the story of Jesus walking on water where he just his disciples were out in the boat, and he was on the shore, and he's like, I'm going to go to them. And so he just walks out on the water steps, you know, peace, what's up? You know, as he comes by to the disciples, the boat, they're like blown away. They think it's a ghost, crazy stuff. But he had no water skis, no jet ski, no boat, no nothing, just him and his feet. He walked on the water. There were the many people that Jesus healed. I mean, there's stories throughout the New Testament of Jesus healing people. People who were blind, who received their sight. People who had body parts missing that regrew body parts. There was, even raised the dead. You know, leprosy. Leprosy was a big disease back then. Jesus healed a lot of people of leprosy. I mean, the young girl at the funeral, this one's the craziest one, is this funeral procession is passing by Jesus, and they've got this body, they're carrying it on a thing, and, you know, Jesus is just kind of hanging out, and the body goes by, he's like, oh, and all of a sudden the girl sits up. All right, freaks everybody out in the funeral procession, but that's what Jesus did. I mean, crazy life, crazy stuff going on. But, you know, nowadays we hear stories like that, and it's just not impressive, is it? Why is that? Well, because we can go to a conference where there's 15,000 people in an auditorium, and Chick-fil-A can feed 15,000 people in 45 minutes. I have literally seen Chick-fil-A do that, where there's been 12,000 people at a stadium, and they get everybody through these lines, and everybody gets a chicken sandwich, fries, and a drink, and it's all done in 45 minutes, and so we're not that impressed with Jesus. Sure, Chick-fil-A doesn't take 5 buns and 2 chicken breasts and multiply them to feed them, but that's the part of the story we really don't believe anyways. And so we're like, well, Chick-fil-A can do what Jesus used to do. Or we hear of walking on water and we think to ourselves, well, for all intent and purposes, I can walk on water. I just got to get behind a ski boat, okay, and do some barefoot skiing behind the boat. I'm zooming across the top of the water. Okay, we can even do better. Nowadays, they got these cool jet packs. Have you guys seen those? Where they strap on this pack and they drop a hose down into the water and they fire it up and you literally come flying up out of the water. Jesus didn't do nothing like that. Medically, we're doing more. We can give people arms and legs that lost them. For leprosy now, all they need is an antibiotic prescribed and it's gone. And so Jesus giving sight to the blind, taking care of leprosy, not that impressive. Even him raising the dead is really not that big of a deal. I mean, he did it for one kid, but every day in the United States, hundreds, thousands of people are resuscitated back from the dead with our paddles, our electroshock, and our CPR. And some guys have even given heart massages on a heart inside the chest and brought people back to life. And so, hey, we can do what Jesus did. Doesn't seem all that great. And so maybe this series is just a waste of time, because really, if you think about it, we can do greater things than Jesus did, right? I mean, how many of us there's been this one human being just came back from space. He spent a year on the International Space Station. Did Jesus ever spend a year in space? No. We put men on the moon. Did Jesus ever go to the moon? No. We've explored Mars. Granted, people weren't there, but we built machines to explore Mars. Jesus didn't build a machine to explore Mars. So why can I stand here with confidence in front of everyone and say, Jesus is greater, and then fill in the blank with anything? For that, we're going to read from the book of Mark. We're going to read chapter 10 and verses 32 through 34. If you know where that's at, you're welcome to turn there. The book of Mark is the second book in the New Testament. So once you hit Matthew, keep going. There he is, the next book in the Bible. If you are here today and you're saying, well, the only Mark I know is my lazy cousin who owes me $20, it's cool. We're going to put it on the screen so you can follow along with us. And if you're here this morning and you don't have a Bible and you'd like a Bible, stop by our Fam Connection Center on your way out the door. They'll put a brand new Bible in your hands to take home with you. All right. So before we read that section, let's talk about our boy Mark here for a minute. All right, so first of all, the thing that we need to know about Mark is that Mark had two first names. He was actually John Mark. And so we can relate to that living in the South, right? If any of you are here this morning and your name is Jim Bob, Billy Bob, or Willie Earl, you get this one, right? You get this. He's got two names just like me. I love myself some John Mark. Well, John Mark, the reason he had two names wasn't because he was from the South, but because he had two parents that were from different ethnic backgrounds, okay? His mom was Jewish, and that's where the name John came from. And his father was a Greek, and that's where the name Mark came from. And his family, they lived in Jerusalem. And a church met in his house. We first meet Mark in Acts chapter 12, and it's a church meeting in his house and them having a worship service. And Mark gets pretty involved in the worship service and serving God. And so the next thing we know, Mark is headed out on what's called a first missionary journey with this guy's name, Paul and Barnabas. And we don't really need to know who they are to complete this morning, but they're very important guys in the New Testament. And Mark headed out with John and with Barnabas, and they got to this land called Turkey. Back then it was called Asia Minor, and they started building Christian churches, not like literally building them physically, but starting churches in people's homes and stuff like that. And about halfway through this project, Mark just got kind of bored. He got kind of turned off. He got kind of frustrated. And so Mark just said, dude, I'm going home. He maybe got homesick. How many people in here get homesick when they're away from home? Most people don't? Okay, that's good. Mark got homesick, and so he ditches Paul and Barnabas. Well, Paul gets so ticked off at Mark for leaving them that when they're ready to head out on their second missionary journey, Barnabas says, hey, Mark wants to go with us. Paul's like, we're not taking that bum with us. And Barnabas is like, why not? So they get into this big fight, and actually the two of them end up splitting up and going their own ways. Paul takes Silas, and Barnabas takes Mark, and they both go on their own journeys. And then at some point, Mark gets hooked up with a guy named Peter. Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, and most of what is written here in the book of Mark is believed to be Peter's preaching of Jesus and his time with Jesus when Jesus was alive. And so that's what it's about. And this is what it says now in Mark chapter 10, verses 32 through 34. All right, they were on their way up to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way. And the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Again, he took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen to him. We're going to go up to Jerusalem, he said, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and to the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him, and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise. So Jesus, he's on his way to Jerusalem. This is the last time he's going to enter the city of Jerusalem. He's gone in and out of the city many times, but here he is now. He's standing on the edge because this time when he enters into the city, he's not going to come out alive. He is going to be arrested. He's going to be tried. He's going to be executed. And so as they're coming up to the city, the people that were traveling with Jesus were a little concerned. I mean, it tells us that the crowd that was following Jesus was afraid. Okay, the text says they were afraid. And you can understand why they were afraid, right? Because, I mean, let's say you had a friend who committed some sort of crime. He killed someone, right? And he knocks on your door and wants to hang out at your house. You know the cops are looking for him. Do you let him in and hang out with him or not? If you let him in and hang out with him, you're probably going to be afraid because the cops could knock on your door and think you're aiding and abetting and arrest you too. Okay, so you're a little bit afraid. Or maybe when you were in high school, you had a friend who all the tough kids wanted to beat up. And you knew that walking in the door of your high school on that Friday morning with that friend meant you were going to get the same beat down your friend was going to get, would cause you to be a little afraid going into the high school, right? Well, that's what happened. That's what's happening here. Jesus has this crowd following him, and they know something bad is about to go down. They know something scary is about to happen to Jesus, and so they're afraid because they think they face the same fate as Jesus. Meanwhile, the text tells us the disciples, they were astonished, okay? They were astonished, though, not because they were excited about the end coming. Yay, we're going to die. You know, that wasn't what they were thinking. That wasn't what was going on through their heart. They were astonished because they couldn't believe they were at this place in their life where they were about to face the Romans, they were about to face the Jews, and they were about to be put on trial, and all sorts of crazy things were going to happen. They were astonished. I mean, it's like I remember when I was 16 and I had to go to court for some stupid things that I had done. And I remember standing outside the Ramsey County Courthouse in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I was looking up at this thing, and I was astonished because I never thought that my life would get to the place where I would be standing in front of a courthouse about to go before a judge and be sentenced for some stupid stuff that I had done. And I think that's what was going on here with the disciples. They were just astonished that they were at this place, that they were standing there with this man who was about to go through everything that he was going to go through. The time had come. And so Jesus knows the disciples are feeling this, so he pulls them aside and again tells them, listen, this was planned. This was all in the hands of God. They are going to arrest me. They are going to condemn me to death. They are going to mock me and make it look like I am not greater than. But Jesus says, hold on. Because I am going to prove that I am greater than, because I am going to rise from the dead. I'm going to come back from the dead, but this isn't going to be a short comeback from the dead like you've got with somebody who you revive in the hospital, because that person who's revived in the hospital eventually dies again. But Jesus is saying, I am going to come back and I am never going to die again. I mean, that is somebody who is greater because death no longer has power over him. But I know that some of you are like, oh, this is crazy talk. Come on, man. You really don't believe that somebody rose from the dead 2,000 years ago and is still alive. But the problem is that when you look at the events that surround this whole thing, there's no other conclusion that you can really come to other than Jesus did, in fact, rise from the dead. Because let's go through this one more time. He was arrested and put on trial. He was found guilty and then handed over to the Romans to be executed. He was nailed to a cross, and a few hours later was declared dead. He had a spear shoved into his side to make sure he was dead. He was then taken from the cross and placed in a tomb cut out of rock. Because he had said he was going to rise again, the Romans wanted to make sure that didn't happen. So they rolled a stone in front of the tomb. They took a seal, which was a giant rope, and they stretched it across and put the Roman insignia on the seal, on this thing to seal it. And then they put a guard of Roman soldiers out there because they were afraid that the disciples were going to come and try and steal the body. But yet what we have happening is that the next day, even though the precautions were taken, the plans were made to prevent Jesus from rising from the dead, the stone was still rolled away, the tomb was still empty, and the words, "He is not here, he has risen," were spoken. And I know that some of you are just saying, no, it can be explained other ways. We can explain it just by what you said there. The disciples, they came and stole the body. That's what happened. So let's think through this for a minute. So the Romans are guarding the tomb. And when you see it painted in pictures, maybe inside your Bible, you see it in your kids when they bring home a coloring piece from kids' church, there's like 2 Roman soldiers standing outside of this tomb guarding Jesus. And you're thinking to yourself, yeah, 11 dudes could take that. Me and 11 friends, we could take 2 Roman soldiers. That's not a problem. And so we think it's not a big deal. But here's the thing. That's not how the Romans rolled, okay? They would not guard a tomb with 2 guys. The first problem we have with this is found in Matthew chapter 28, verse 11. You don't need to turn there. It'll be on the screen. But what happens is it says some of the guards went into the city and reported what had happened to the chief priests. It says, while the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priest everything that had happened. If there were only 2 guards at the tomb, you had one of 2 choices. Either one of the guards went or all of the guards went. Not some of them, because there was no some of them to go. Okay? The second thing that you need to know is that Roman protocol would not let them leave for 2 soldiers at the tomb. Bare minimum, they would go with 4. And you're still saying, well, 4 and 11, that's a winnable fight. Well, what we have to know is what was going on in Palestine. Palestine was a thorn in the Romans' rear end. okay? The Romans had so many problems in Palestine. And so if you're thinking to yourself that we can solve the issues that are going on in the Middle East, especially in Israel and Palestine, it's been going on for over 2,000 years. I don't think we can solve it either. Okay? But they had all kinds of issues. And so the Romans they had tons of forces stationed in that area because they were always putting down revolts, because they were always quashing the Jewish people, because they were always ready to rebel against the Romans. And the Romans knew that there was 11 disciples waiting out there, plus they knew that there was other men and women that had followed Jesus into the city that were afraid. And so they knew that they had to be ready for any sort of attack that would come on that tomb. And so the assumption is that the Romans probably stationed a lot more soldiers out there than 2 or even 4. And plus this fight, it would have had to happen with hand-to-hand combat between the disciples and the Roman soldiers. It's not like Peter could have taken a sniper rifle from 400 yards and taken out the Roman soldiers, okay? I mean, they had to get face to face. They had to walk up and go, "Sup?" Bam! Punch them in the face. Take that. They had to literally get up there and fight each other. Okay, that's what they had to do, and they had to have a fight. And yes, they were fishermen, but it probably wouldn't have gone good for them. Fishermen are tough, they're gruff, they're rough, but to take on soldiers, especially combat-hardened, well-trained Roman soldiers, it probably wouldn't happen. It would be like this. Let's say me and the band, we want Chick-fil-A after church today. Those of you who eat Chick-fil-A know it is not open on Sunday. So let's say the one on South Florida Avenue is guarded by some Marines. But me and the band, we think we got this. Okay? We're going to go and we're going to take some Chick-fil-A. We're going to beat those Marines and get our food. So if I was to have a pool and ask you guys to bet, would you bet on the Marines or would you bet on me and the worship team? Who's taking me and the worship team? Anyone? All right, I got a couple of people that would be willing to take the worship team. All right, who's taking the Marines? Yeah, most people are taking the Marines. But see, if we were to take that bet, we'd probably lose, Greg. I know you raised your hand, but we'd probably lose. I'm not going to lie, we'd probably lose. But you just lose a little bit of money betting on us. But if you bet on the fact that the disciples took on Roman soldiers and beat them and took Jesus' body out of the tomb to justify not believing in the resurrection of Jesus, you are taking a big, calculated gamble. Because you know what? Eternity rests on the fact of whether or not Jesus came out of that grave. And that's what we have to understand. There's a whole lot more at stake in just saying, the disciples just did it. So some of you are thinking, well, okay, all right, I get that. Maybe it wasn't the disciples. Maybe it was Jesus. Maybe he wasn't dead, He got in the tomb and got in the coolness of the tomb and laid on the rock, and it felt so good and so amazing, and he just kind of got up and walked out. Let's put some pieces together here. Okay, so the Romans, they were pretty good at torture, and when they whipped you, they did a lot of damage. The assumption is Jesus probably didn't have much of a back left when the Romans were done whipping him, because they literally used stone and glass and metal on the ends of the whip to rip chunks of muscle out of his body. But then, his back is shredded, he's put on a cross. The way that you usually died when you were crucified by the Romans was you died of asphyxiation. You couldn't breathe. What would happen is you would get up there, you'd be like this, your shoulders would eventually pop out of place, cause your body to collapse, closing your air passage off so you couldn't breathe, and you'd eventually die of asphyxiation. That's a hard word to say. So Jesus, so far, has had his back shredded and his shoulders are out of socket. Then they shoved a spear in his side. Okay, so you're telling me that this guy who's had all of that happen is going to get up, take a 2,000-pound stone, move it out of the way, fight some Roman soldiers, and walk away. Not too sure that's going to work out in Jesus' favor, because I'm pretty confident that if some guy came out of a tomb in that case, the band and I could take them, okay? We could totally take Jesus with his arms dislocated, a hole in his side, and his back all shredded. I mean, this one's even more unbelievable than the disciples stealing the body. And then finally, there's this. Hundreds of people saw him alive after he came out of the tomb. Literally hundreds. Acts chapter 1, verses 3 through 9 says this. After his suffering, he presented himself to them and gave many convincing proofs that he was alive. He appeared to them over a period of 40 days and spoke about the kingdom of God. On one occasion, while he was eating with them, he gave them this command. Do not leave Jerusalem, but wait for the gift my Father promised, which you have heard me speak about. For John baptized with water, but in a few days you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit. Then they gathered around him and asked, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? He said to them, it is not for you to know the times or the dates the Father has set by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And this is the key verse. After he said this, he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. So people have tried to explain this, to say how they couldn't have seen Jesus. The first explanation is, they just had mass hallucinations. I don't know how many of you have used mind-altering substances to gain hallucinations, but I've been there. I'm not going to give you any more details than that. I just had a friend. He decided to lace marijuana with LSD. It didn't go well. Okay, that was one of the worst experiences of my life. But anyways, y'all didn't need to know that. I don't know why I said that. But anyways, what I found is that in those situations, okay, in those circumstances when people are together, like I could pass out acid to everybody in this room and then ask us to come back and report on what you saw. We would not have one person saying the exact same thing as another. Everyone's hallucination would be different, okay? Some it would be really good, some it would be really bad. But that's the deal. Even in a mind-altered state, you can't have everybody hallucinating the same thing. And yet, you want us to believe that a group of people, 500, it tells us in Corinthians, was standing out there when Jesus rose from the dead, that 500 people saw the exact same thing. It just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. Even if some people try to explain it as, well, they were just in such mourning and they were in such grieving and they were in such pain that they just saw Jesus even though he really wasn't there. That one, it's hard to buy because it's 40 days after the event. And even in things like that, it doesn't work out where everybody sees the same thing. I remember when I was younger, there was this group that claimed that the Virgin Mary was going to appear in the middle of the forest of northern Minnesota on an Easter Sunday. And so literally thousands of people drove to this forest, okay? And they started interviewing the people when they were coming out of there. And each one of them had some different crazy experience as to what they saw. Mass hallucinations do not happen. So what's the moral of all of this? What can we conclude from all of this? It means Jesus is greater. It means Jesus has done something that no one else or nothing else has ever done or can do. It means he defeated death. And what that means for our lives is it means that Jesus is greater than anything. Somebody in this room this week may have gotten some news that a friend, that a family member, or maybe they themselves have been diagnosed with some sort of disease, and you're saying to yourself, man, the doctors don't even think they can take care of us. There's nothing greater than this disease. Can I tell you this morning that Jesus is greater than any disease that you can face? Some other ones, you've had financial tragedy in the last several months in your life, and you don't know how your family is going to recover, and it feels like a never-ending spiral, and you don't know if there's anything greater than that situation you're in. Can I tell you this morning that Jesus is greater than your financial situation? Some of you are facing addictions in your life. You've got things that control you and keep you, and you can't shake them, and you don't think there's anything greater than that thing holding on to you. Can I tell you this morning that Jesus is greater than that addiction that's trying to keep you down and out? Maybe your marriage is a mess. It's falling apart. You've tried to keep it together, but it just seems like there is no answer. Can I tell you that Jesus is greater than what's going on in your marriage? Wherever you're standing, whatever you are looking at, Jesus is greater than that situation. He has defeated death. He has won